On the way this afternoon, a pair of bills, including one that would repeal certain minimum standards for-profit colleges. House will also consider a bill dealing with private property rights and eminent domain issues. Now live to the House floor here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in session. The prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Reverend Adam McHugh from the Avitas Hospice, Covina, California.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we acknowledge and praise you on this day that you have made. We are reminded that all power and authority ultimately come from you. We do not wield our own power, but we are stewards who have been entrusted with a greater power. May the work that is done today in the halls of the powerful be done on behalf of the powerless. Would you open our ears to listen to the needs and the cries of those who are seldom heard? May the strong voices today speak out for the sake of those with no voice. Would you grant our leaders courage and wisdom to do what is right? And would you pour out on them a spirit of peace, love, kindness, and gentleness. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
My colleagues will join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, as you know, the skill and dedication of the team with whom I serve in the office of the parliamentarian and the office of compilation of precedents are unsurpassed. In my judgment, they are ready to continue their commitment to excellence in the procedural practice of the House without me. I appreciate your allowing me to lead the office to this juncture. Please now accept my resignation effective March 31st, 2012. I am grateful to you and your predecessors, Mr. Speaker, for supporting the exercise of independent professional judgment by your parliamentarians. It is a credit to the House that its presiding officers shed their partisan cloaks and follow our considered advice. It has been my honor to serve in the office of the parliamentarian for 25 years. To whatever extent I have made good of the opportunity, I credit the steady support of my wife, Nancy Sand Sullivan, with the inspiration of our children, Michael, Margaret, and Matthew. Signed sincerely, John V. Sullivan.
Without objection, the gentleman from California, Mr. Dry, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me begin by...
Will the gentleman yield?
Of course.
The Chair appoints, pursuant to Section 287A of Title II of the United States Code, Thomas J. Wickham, Jr. as parliamentarian of the House of Representatives to succeed John V. Sullivan, resigned. Gentleman from California.
Speaker, let me first extend congratulations to John Sullivan for his extraordinary service to this institution over the last quarter century. We're going to have a chance to talk about one of the greatest, most incisive minds in this place. The bar is not too high for that, but he's been extraordinary. And I will also want to congratulate Mr. Wickham as well, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I rise to say that on the 28th of June, 1787, Benjamin Franklin, in the midst of the Constitutional Convention, said that they should call on the assistance of heaven and have a prayer every day as the assembly began. And that's a tradition that continues today, and it's one that has just been utilized by Reverend Adam McHugh, who is a very, very capable and thoughtful guy who is from Upland, California, and he's a prolific writer as well as serving as chaplain at the Vitas Hospice Center in Covina, California. I've got to say also, Mr. Speaker, that I believe that we are making history here in that both the chaplain of the United States House of Representatives, our dear friend Father Patrick Conroy, and Reverend McHugh, and Reverend McHugh's wife Lindsay, and I are all graduates of a very small institution just to the east of Los Angeles known as Claremont McKenna College. And so I want to say that I believe that hearing from Reverend McHugh was wonderful. I would like to enter into the record. I have a copy of his book that he's just given me here, and I'd like to enter into the record, Mr. Speaker, a list of the publications that he has put forward, and to say that he has one coming next year, and we all look forward to that, and I hope I get an autographed copy of that one as well. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. Chair will entertain up to 15 further requests for one-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor a small business in my district, a business I was proud to give an Economic Excellence Award to last week. Mr. Trophy, based in Red Bank, Tennessee, is a great small business which embodies the American values of hard work and success. Founded in 1972, Mr. Trophy is still a family business, currently owned by Doris Prevost and managed by her daughter, Linda Herman. A staple of the Chattanooga community, Mr. Trophy is well known for both customer service and community involvement. Mr. Trophy has designed trophies, plaques, and custom awards for over 40 years, creating jobs while often weathering difficult times. Having run a business with my wife for 24 years, I can understand the challenges that have faced Mr. Trophy along the way. Not only has Mr. Trophy met these challenges, but they have found success with their business and become a pillar of their community. I hope that you will join me in honoring Mr. Trophy for their well-earned Economic Excellence Award. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, 124 days. That's how many days between today and July 1st when the interest rates for the Stafford Student Loan Program is going to double from 3.4% to 6.8% unless Congress acts. Myself, Congressman Peters, Senator Jack Reed in the Senate have filed legislation to lock in those rates at 3.4%. This chamber must act. Today, student loan debt now exceeds credit card debt in the United States of America, a milestone which is a disaster and a formula for failure in this country. We have fallen from #1 in the world in terms of graduation rates to #12. This is a threat in terms of our future economic vitality, and as young people are all across this Capitol over the next 2 months or so, I hope members of Congress look those kids in the eye and do the right thing to protect college affordability. Pass H.R. 3826. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Ask permission to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, for 21 days in a row, gas prices have risen to average now $3.70 per gallon, a 30-cent increase in only 1 month. At this rate, Americans could be forking over $4 for a gallon of gas in no time. That's insane. American families and businesses are already struggling in this economy, so I'm calling on the IRS to provide relief for businesses by increasing the standard mileage rate like it did after Hurricane Katrina and again in 2005 and 2011. With gas prices rising higher and faster than ever, the administration and Congress need to take action now, beginning with the Keystone XL pipeline, estimated to bring 830,000 barrels of oil every day to U.S. refineries. And Keystone would create nearly 20,000 new American jobs. Let's pursue a real, all-of-the-above energy strategy and give Americans the security and relief that they want, need, and deserve. Yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, like many of members of our body, I represent a community with a postal facility that has been slated for closure. In Buffalo, 700 workers stand to lose their jobs if the United States Postal Service goes forward with the closure of the William Street mail processing facility. The good news is there's legislation that could have an immediate impact. My friend and colleague, Representative Steve Lynch, has introduced H.R. 1351, which would recalculate the Postal Service's pension funding, easing the budget strains that necessitate this drastic facility closure proposal. Last week, I sent a letter, along with my Western New York colleagues, Representatives Slaughter and Hochul, urging Republican leadership to bring this bill to a floor for immediate consideration. Mr. Speaker, this legislation is bipartisan and currently has 228 co-sponsors, more than half the House. Though broader reforms will be needed, this bill is what will keep the Postal Service afloat in the short term. It's time for Congress to step up, put aside politics, and do what's right for small businesses, working families, and postal customers nationwide. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida rise?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my reading.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm so pleased to recognize the 20th anniversary of the Florida Keys Outreach Coalition. For 20 years, Reverend Stephen Braddock and the Florida Keys Outreach Coalition have worked to empower individuals and families, assisting them in reaching their full potential by providing the resources and support they need to become self-sufficient. In its mission, it is very simply to eliminate homelessness in the Keys, Monroe County. The Florida Keys Coalition has become a model human services organization in reaching this goal. Its goal has become a reality for many families who have transitioned from homelessness into permanent housing. I've had the great privilege of seeing their work firsthand, and it is nothing short of inspirational. I've witnessed the effectiveness of their outreach efforts, and I've seen the benefits of their emergency shelter and transitional housing programs. I applaud everyone at the Florida Keys Outreach Coalition for their selfless efforts as they strive to better the future for the homeless. And thank you for 20 years of service to our South Florida community. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Is this good?
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, a silent movie won this year's Oscar for the Best Picture. That award just as easily could have gone here to the House, because the House Republicans continue to be silent on job creation and seem intent on dragging America back to 1929, when the last silent film won the Oscar. When Republicans recently held a hearing on contraception, they did their best to silence female voices, inviting 5 men and 0 women to testify on the topic of female reproductive health. Since they gained the majority, House Republicans have been painfully silent about actually creating jobs. In 2011, they voted for a budget that would have cut 700,000 of them. This year, they proposed a transportation bill that would cut another 555,000 of them. As Americans ask for real job proposals, Republicans remain silent. It's time that someone actually started speaking up for the American people. Despite 23 straight months of job growth, there still are almost 8 million people trying to re-enter the workforce. Unlike this year's Best Picture winner, this continued silent treatment from the Republican majority offers Americans no entertainment and, sadly, no employment. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina rise?
Seek permission to address the House for 1 minute, Madam Speaker, and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleague from Virginia needs to redirect his comments about silent response to the Democrat-controlled Senate, the party of which he is a member. Fostering job growth for the American people continues to be the #1 job for House Republicans, and we have a record to prove it. With unemployment and underemployment at above 15% for the past 36 months, the Obama economy continues to produce the nation's worst jobless record since the Great Depression. So far, by following the House Republican Plan for America's Job Creators, the House passed more than 30 bipartisan jobs bills on behalf of the American people. Each of these bills is aimed at unleashing the power of our private sector to freely and confidently build, invest, innovate, and expand again, and put millions of Americans back to work. Unfortunately, the vast majority of these bipartisan House-passed jobs bills are being ignored or blocked in the Democrat-controlled Senate. The American people are tired of waiting. It's time for Democrats in the Senate and the White House to put politics aside and pass these jobs bills. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from American Samoa rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, Lynn Sanity is here with us today on behalf of over 18 million Asia-Pacific Americans. And as members of the Asia-Pacific Congressional Caucus, I rise today to commend rising NBA star Jeremy Lin. A son of immigrants from Taiwan and the first American NBA player of Chinese or Taiwanese ancestry, Jeremy is the first Harvard economics major 4.0 GPA graduate to play for the league since the 1950s. Since playing as the Knicks point guard, he has scored the highest point total in his first 5 games, 136 points, for any player since the 1970s. In the history of Asia-Pacific American participation in the NBA, Japanese-American Wataru Misaka broke the NBA color barrier when he played for the Knicks in 1940s. Following Misaka, we have Japanese-American Rex Walters, Filipino-American Raymond Townsend, Samoan-American Wally Alifua Rank, and currently Samoan-American James Johnson, who plays for the Toronto Raptors, and Hawaiian-American Jason Kapono, who now plays for the LA Lakers. Along with these pioneers, Jeremy Lin's rise to international stardom has broken ethnic stereotypes in our society. I commend Jeremy for this tremendous achievement and for his example to the world and what America is all about. You work hard, you be true to your principles of fairness and equity, things will come your way. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
To address
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in outrage and disbelief that my Republican colleagues believe that they are more qualified to determine what a woman can do with her own body than she is. Republicans say that they are on the side of freedom and personal responsibility. They also say that they are against big government intrusion, but when it comes to women in this country, it's nothing but a bunch of empty rhetoric. Let's be clear, the debate about contraception is really about Republicans' deep-seated opposition to women making decisions about their own bodies. It is an outrage, it is unconscionable, it is insulting, and it is un-American to treat women, by virtue of their gender, as second-class citizens by denying their ability to control their own destinies. To my Republican colleagues, shame on you for waging your hypocritical war on women. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, it's been more than 2 years since the Supreme Court rendered its Citizens United decision, and American politics is becoming more corrupt by the dollar. Election season is flooded with special interest money, confirming the deep skepticism of an American public that is estranged from and fed up with its government. In the past 2 years alone, super PACs have raised approximately $181 million, an increase of more than 1,200% in outside spending during a presidential election. Our system allows for corporations and extremely wealthy individuals to influence elections without any accountability, and this must change. That's why I'm a co-sponsor and strong supporter of Disclose 2012 Act, which would shine a light on the secret money in political campaigns. The Disclose Act requires public reporting by super PACs, corporations, unions, and outside groups within 24 hours of making a campaign expenditure, and it forces leaders of corporations and other outside groups to stand by their campaign ads by appearing in them and stating that they approve this message. Madam Speaker, I urge Republican leadership to bring the Disclose Act up for a vote. Until we get big money out of politics, we will never be able to responsibly address the major issues facing American families. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio rise? The gentlelady is recognized without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, today I rise to address the epidemic of hunger in this nation. Nearly 49 million people in the United States suffer from hunger. That is 1 in 6 in the U.S. population, including more than 1 in 5 children. Feeding America recently reported that 46% of households served by its agencies must choose between paying for utilities or heating fuel and paying for food. 39% of households said they must choose between paying their mortgage or their rent and paying for food. Hunger is real in this country. We know that, yet some still demonize SNAP and other feeding programs. Preventing hunger is a moral imperative that should be shared by people in every party, every demographic, and every religion. I encourage my colleagues to visit a local food bank in their district or take the SNAP challenge. Find out what it is like to live for just 1 day or 1 week as someone who struggles with hunger. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, Californians drive a lot, so when gas prices jump, we feel it first and the most. Back home, gas jumped 26 cents in the last week and 57 cents since this time last year. We are paying, on the average, $4.30 a gallon. Our constituents need our help. They also understand the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. I happen to drive a Nissan Leaf, an all-electric vehicle, which, by the way, will be built right here in America in Tennessee in the near future. This gives me the benefit of driving past gas stations, but I don't have to fill up my tank to be shocked by the prices at the pump. And if given the opportunity, I think most Americans would jump at the chance to join me in driving right past those high gas prices and stop sending hundreds of billions of dollars to the Middle East. Drill, baby, drill won't lower gas prices today or tomorrow, but it will feed our addiction to dirty fossil fuels, which are quickly running out. Let's work together to invest in infrastructure for electric vehicles to make them more affordable and convenient. We will create jobs, take hold of the economy of the future, and end our dependence on oil. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. With the unemployment rate now at 8.3%, we continue to see positive signs that the U.S. economy is on the road to recovery. Now more than ever, it is absolutely imperative that we continue to make critical investments in infrastructure, advanced manufacturing, and high-tech research and development. By doing so, we will address our crumbling roads and bridges, create jobs, and provide future generations with the robust economic foundation on which to build a stronger America. The President's budget has reflected the desire to make these important investments in our economy. And I urge my colleagues to also recognize the decisions we make today will have unavoidable consequences tomorrow. While our economy is recovering, it is still fragile. Now is not the time to be making arbitrary cuts to key components of our economy. We all bear the burden of such cuts, and we are all ultimately responsible for the country's well-being. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York rise? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the American people's patience is wearing thin. A majority of the American people believe that jobs should be the #1 priority of the 112th Congress. However, over a year has passed since the Republican majority took control of the People's House, and we have still not passed a single significant jobs bill. To avoid any confusion, let's discuss what a jobs bill is not. A jobs bill is not a tax cut for the multimillionaires and billionaires. A jobs bill is not protecting subsidies for corporations that ship jobs overseas. And a jobs bill is not, Madam Speaker, dismissing out of hand the President's plan for reviving American manufacturing and creating stronger and a more skilled workforce. As our economy continues to recover from the recent economic downturn, it is past time for the Republican majority to work with the President and get our nation back to work. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 563 and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 114, House Resolution 563. Resolved, that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 2117, to prohibit the Department of Education from overreaching into academic affairs and program eligibility under Title IV of the Higher Education Act of 1965. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Education and the Workforce. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Education and the Workforce, now printed in the bill. The committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. All points of order against the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute are waived. No amendment to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill or to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion, except one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. For the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
House Resolution 563 provides for a structured rule providing for consideration of H.R. 2117, which repeals the Department of Education's state authorization regulation and the federal definition of a credit hour. I think most people, Madam Speaker, on both sides of the aisle would agree that our higher education system is the envy of the world. The bill we will consider today, H.R. 2117, the Protecting Academic Freedom in Higher Education Act, passed the House Education and Workforce Committee with bipartisan support on June 15, 2011. And I'm very, very proud of that. A lot of Americans believe members of Congress can't work together, but H.R. 2117 shows the opposite. I appreciate the opportunity to work with my colleagues across the aisle to pass this legislation and hope we can find more ways to work together. In 2010, the Department of Education issued a series of regulations purportedly aimed at improving the integrity of federal student aid programs. Included in these regulations was a new, quote, state authorization, end quote, rule that imposes a one-size-fits-all federal mandate on institutions of higher education and infringes on the rights of states to regulate their higher education systems. Institutions are already required to be authorized by the state in which they're located. However, the Federal Department of Education was not satisfied leaving these decisions solely to states and added several federal criteria to existing state authorization processes, which would unnecessarily complicate the process for institutions and further burden already strapped state governments by increasing their workload. In addition, it is unclear whether the regulation would require online education programs to be authorized in every state in which they have students. One online university reports the state authorization regulation could cost the institution $700,000 initially, plus an additional $400,000 annually. H.R. 2117 also repeals the federal definition of a credit hour. This definition has historically been the jurisdiction of accrediting agencies and institutions. And again, the process has worked very well. There have been no complaints about it. Last year, Excelsior College President John Ebersol testified in front of the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Training about this regulation, stating it inserts the Department of Education into academic judgments that should be made at the institution level and could destroy accelerated learning programs that allow students to complete their education more quickly. These regulations will restrict innovation, limit flexibility, and pave the way for additional federal overreach into higher education. Madam Speaker, with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the gentlewoman from North Carolina, my good friend Dr. Foxx, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, here we go again. Another day in the House of Representatives and another day without a jobs bill. It's almost March, and my Republican colleagues who control this House still have not put a meaningful jobs bill on the floor. In fact, their best chance at passing a jobs bill could have been the highway reauthorization bill, but they screwed that up so badly that they had to yank it off the floor before an embarrassing bipartisan defeat. So what are we doing today? Well, Madam Speaker, today we're considering a bill targeting Department of Education regulations, defining credit hours and setting minimum requirements that all higher education institutions must meet to be considered authorized by a state. Targeting Department of Education regulations. We're not considering a jobs bill. There's no new bipartisan highway bill. There's no bill that helps put cops, firefighters, and librarians back to work. There's no new bill that helps train workers for the future. The economy may be inching along, recovering slowly, but it needs some help. We need a real, comprehensive jobs package. Instead, we just get a bill to dismantle a few regulations with no attempt to make our education system better. This is no way to run the House of Representatives. Let's look at where we've been. They started off the new Congress with their health care repeal and replace, but we're still waiting on the replace part. To be clear, Republicans voted to take away health protections for seniors. They voted to take away health care protections for young people under 26. They voted to take away health care protections for those with pre-existing conditions, but they haven't proposed anything to replace those important provisions. Since then, the Republican leadership has played legislative Russian roulette with our economy by holding the debt limit discussions hostage, by holding up the payroll tax cut and unemployment insurance extension multiple times, and most recently by proposing the most partisan highway reauthorization bill I think, in the history of this Congress. On top of that, the Republican leadership has wasted our time by debating resolutions to defund National Public Radio and Planned Parenthood. We've debated resolutions making it easier for unsafe people to carry concealed weapons across state lines. And we spent a good period of time on this House floor debating a bill to reaffirm our national motto. And soon we'll probably vote on a bill to restrict contraception, another attack on women's health by this Republican-controlled House. Madam Speaker, there are more important things we should be doing, and yes, education should be something we debate. I'm all for bills improving our education system. In fact, I'd welcome the opportunity to act in a bipartisan way to improve our school systems across the board. And what we should be talking about today is college affordability. What we should be talking about today are ways to ensure that every single American student has access to a quality education. And despite what Republican Senator Rick Santorum might think, it's not snobby to try to make sure our students have access to the best education possible. What we should be considering on the floor of the House today is legislation to extend the tax deduction for tuition and fees that families across this country rely on to help bear the incredible burden of rising tuition costs. This deduction, Madam Speaker, of up to $4,000 expired at the end of last year, and congressional action is required to extend this tax benefit past the 2011 tax year. But that is not what we are considering today on the House floor. We should also be considering legislation to prevent the looming increase in subsidized Stafford student loan rates from 3.4% to 6.8% that will occur if Congress does not act before July 1st, 2012. These need-based loans are critical for students who might otherwise be unable to attend college, and we should act now on legislation to stop the doubling of their interest rates. But, Madam Speaker, that is not what we are doing today. Republican governors, including the head of the Republican Governors Association, Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, overwhelmingly support President Obama's college education agenda. But in the House of Representatives, all we see is an effort to attack and dismantle the President's initiatives and no attempt to actually make college more accessible and more affordable. Madam Speaker, this is just another squandered opportunity by this Republican Congress. I can't say I'm surprised, but I am disappointed. It is time for us to work in a bipartisan way, to focus on how to get this economy moving again, to focus on jobs. And when we focus on education, let's focus on issues that will make a real difference in the lives of our young people. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I know my colleague is a very hardworking member of Congress, and I know that he pays close attention to what's going on in the Congress. And I'm sure he simply forgot the fact that we have passed over 30 bills in the House and sent them to the Senate, and the Senate has not acted on them. These 30 bills, we've actually passed hundreds of bills, but those 30 bills in particular were focused on creating jobs. Now, my colleague seems to have forgotten that. He seems also to have forgotten the fact that the Senate is controlled by his colleagues in the Democratic Party. And that's where the problem is with jobs bills. Also, most of those 30 bills that we've passed, or a great number of them, had energy components, Madam Speaker, which would help bring down the cost of gasoline, which would help improve our energy resources in this country. So we get a twofer from most of those bills. However, again, those bills are languishing in the Senate. We have focused on creating jobs in the House, and one of the ways that we could truly create jobs is to reduce our deficit and reduce our debt. And Republicans have been very much focused on that here in the House of Representatives. And in most cases, again, we get bipartisan support for those efforts. In fact, the 30 jobs bills that have passed the House have had bipartisan support. So there are ways for us to work together. And I think the focus of my colleague is to increase spending, increase federal government involvement, and we know that that goes against the grain. We know from history that that does not improve the economy, does not create jobs. We have an unemployment and underemployment rate of over 15%, created beginning with the Democrats' takeover of the Congress in January of 2007, going through their 4 years, and then it really skyrocketed when President Obama was elected and was there for 2 years with Democrat-controlled Congress. So I'd just like to remind my colleague that he goes back a little ways in history in talking about things that we have done here, but he fails to mention some of the effects of what he and his colleagues had. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I would point out to my friend from North Carolina that the problem with the transportation bill, which had the potential to create millions of jobs in this country, was not the United States Senate. The problem with the transportation bill was the extreme right here in the House of Representatives that insisted that their leadership bring to the floor one of the most partisan, one of the most awful transportation bills we have ever seen. You know, the sad thing is that transportation bills used to be bipartisan. In fact, they've always been bipartisan, where Democrats and Republicans could come together. This bill was so partisan that even a number of Republicans couldn't support it. And so that they yanked it from the House floor because they were fearful of an embarrassing defeat. A good, robust surface transportation bill is a good jobs bill. We need to invest in our infrastructure in this country. We need to invest in our roads and our bridges and in mass transit. The transportation bill that the Republicans brought to the floor gutted mass transit, just gutted it. So that's not a problem with the United States Senate. That's a problem with the leadership here in the House of Representatives. You know, my colleague talks about jobs. The President of the United States came to this chamber and addressed the nation on the need to create more jobs, on the need to help create a climate where more private sector jobs could happen. And he submitted to us a plan. We cannot even get an up or down vote on the President's jobs plan. We can't even get a vote on it. So when my friends talk about jobs, you know, we have this opportunity to at least vote on a jobs bill. If you don't want to vote for jobs, that's one thing. But at least give us the opportunity to vote up or down on it. And just one final thing about the deficit and the debt. I don't know of a single economist who would disagree with the statement that this debt crisis that we're currently in began with the passage of the Bush tax cuts, which were not paid for. Not paid for. Then the prescription drug bill that was a lot more expensive than my Republican colleagues advertised wasn't paid for. Add on to that 2 wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, not paid for. The last time this country didn't pay for a war was when we borrowed money from the French to fight the British. I mean, we're going to war and asking brave the young men and women who serve in our military to put their lives on the line, and we're not even willing to pay for it. So that's how we got in this mess. Add to that the greed on Wall Street, which brought this economy to a halt, and here we are, trying to struggle to get our economy back on its feet. But I'm going to tell you that we're not going to get this economy back on its feet unless we invest in the American people, unless we invest in education, unless we invest in our infrastructure, unless we invest in medical research, unless we invest in the innovation economy so that we can compete in the global economy in the years to come. So I don't want to hear any lectures about deficits and debts. You know, it is not even credible for my friends on the other side to point the finger on that, given the fact when Bill Clinton left office we had record surpluses. We know how we started in this decline, and now we need to figure out a way to dig ourselves out. So again, I wish we were debating a transportation bill on the floor of the House today. I wish we were debating a bill to be able to address the fact that interest rates on student loans are going to increase unless we do something. We ought to make education more affordable for people. And no one in this country who wants a college education ought not to get one because they can't afford it. Those are the things we should be talking about here today. And instead, they pulled the transportation bill, and we're doing this today, and we'll be out of here, you know, on Thursday at about before noon, I'm told. I think the American people want us to work on their behalf, and I regret the fact that this bill, however well-intentioned, to me is not the legislation we should be debating right now. This is not the urgent need. We ought to be talking about jobs. And my friends on the other side of the aisle, when it comes to jobs, have an absolutely lousy record. I reserve my time.
Gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There's so much to refute in so little time. I would like to point out to my colleague that he mentions the Bush tax cuts. He conveniently forgets to mention that they actually should be called the Obama-Pelosi tax cuts, because those tax cuts were extended in 2010 when President Obama was president and Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of this House. And so they should no longer be called the Bush tax cuts. They should rightfully be called the Obama-Pelosi tax cuts, because even those two people understood that we should not raise taxes in the middle of a horrible recession, brought on, I might say, by our colleagues across the aisle. I'd also like to point out to my colleague from Massachusetts that let's assume that those tax increases were allowed to go into effect. We would still have a $400 billion deficit in this country. We know that if we took away every penny of wealth that those millionaires and billionaires that they so desperately want to tax, if we took away every penny of their wealth, not just increased their taxes, but took all their wealth away from them, it would amount to a little over $1 trillion. And then it wouldn't be available. There would be no tax increases available on those people in the future, and we still wouldn't have solved our problem. Now, our colleagues across the aisle want to make it worse by continuing to spend money. I know my colleague is not on the Education Committee, and maybe he isn't aware of the fact that the Department of Education has the third largest share of our discretionary spending of all the departments in the federal government. Only DOD, only the Department of Defense and Health and Human Services have larger budgets than the Department of Education. But it's still not enough money. And what have we got to show for all of that money? Test scores absolutely flat. No improvement since 1965 for over $2 trillion spent on education. Madam Speaker, I'm sorry again. I can't allow my colleague to rewrite history in his own terms. I'd also like to point out that when President Obama had both the House and the Senate in his control, 60 votes in the Senate and 255 votes here, did he propose a jobs bill? No. He waited till he'd been in office 3 years before he proposed a jobs bill. And my colleagues across the aisle were in charge of this body in the Senate for 4 years. Did they reauthorize the transportation bill? Did they reauthorize ESEA? No. So I'm sorry. I believe in that old saying, people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, can I inquire of my friend, the gentlelady from North Carolina, how many more speakers she has?
We have none, and I'm prepared to close if my colleagues are prepared to close.
We'll be prepared. Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Let me respond, Madam Speaker, by reminding my colleagues that when President Obama became President of the United States, he inherited the worst economy since the Great Depression. My colleagues don't like to hear that, but that's just the facts. And this has been a very difficult time, not only for the U.S. economy, but for the global economy. And the President has been trying, with little or no help from this House, to get this economy back on the right track. And the good news is that in spite of all the obstructionism here in the House of Representatives by my Republican colleagues, the economy is slowly but surely getting better, little by little. We could help that if we actually talked about jobs and actually voted on bills that were about investing in people and creating jobs, putting people back to work. I mean, we could accelerate this recovery, but the obstructionism continues. And I should point out, Madam Speaker, that those of us on the Democratic side have nothing against rich people, millionaires or billionaires. It's fabulous that in this country people can accrue enormous wealth. Where we have problems is when Warren Buffett's secretary pays a higher tax rate than Warren Buffett. There's something fundamentally wrong with our tax system that puts all the burden on middle-class families and basically provides a whole bunch of loopholes so that a lot of the wealthiest people and a lot of the wealthiest corporations in this country can escape paying taxes. I think what people want is fairness. It's not about soaking the rich. It's about fairness. And I'm going to tell you, this tax system we have right now isn't fair to middle-class families at all. And I would also say to my colleague, we talk about our deficits and talk about our debt. I mean, don't exclude these wars that we're fighting. We borrow $10 billion a month for Afghanistan alone. We borrow it. We don't ask anyone to pay for it. It goes on our credit card. How is that being responsible? How is that doing the right thing? I mean, I want these wars ended. I think the war in Iraq was a mistake, and I want us to get out of Afghanistan as soon as humanly possible. But whether you're for or against these wars, you ought to pay for them. You ought to pay for them. And if you don't, it goes onto our credit card. $10 billion a month for Afghanistan alone. Madam Speaker, I would also just say that, one of the ways to get out of this deficit and out of this debt we have right now is to grow the economy, to put people back to work. More people working, they pay taxes, you could put it toward lowering our debt. But what I fear, and what has bothered me about my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, is they have used the deficit as an excuse to go after programs like Medicare and Social Security, Medicaid, programs that provide a circle of protection for people in our country. Our senior citizens are the most vulnerable. So rather than going down that way, and rather than debating the bill that we're debating today, I wish we were debating the President's jobs bill. I wish we were debating something that we could send over to the Senate that would help put people back to work, that would help this economy grow faster. But that's not what we're doing. We're doing the same old, which is not much of anything. This is a place, unfortunately, where trivial issues get debated passionately and important ones not at all. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have to point out again to my colleague that the Democrats took control of the House of Representatives and also the Senate in January 2007. When they did, the unemployment rate in this country was 4.5%. We were projected at that time to have a surplus in our budget of about $450 billion. In just a short 2 years, the unemployment rate skyrocketed and the deficit skyrocketed. The Democrats were in control of Congress when the president took office. That's why he inherited a rotten economy. He didn't inherit a rotten economy from President Bush. He inherited a rotten economy from his own party, and he's frankly done nothing to make it any better. I'd also like to point out to my colleague across the aisle that the stimulus that he voted for, which the president promised to do so much for the economy, was $1 trillion, which is 9 years' worth of spending on national defense for the war in Iraq, given his figures alone. Madam Speaker, the American people have heard a lot recently about exploding college costs, the burden of student debt. President Obama highlighted these issues in his State of the Union address, and therefore it's ironic that the Department of Education, which reports to him, is increasing the cost of higher education with unnecessary rules and regulations. At the Higher Education Subcommittee's hearing on college costs in November, we heard many suggestions on how colleges and universities could cut costs. We heard from colleges who've cut their operating budgets, offered expedited degree programs, and encouraged dual enrollment by high school students. Students and families are struggling to make ends meet, and higher education institutions must find ways to cut costs. Imposing onerous rules and regulations at the federal level is a disincentive to the schools to do that. It's also a major disincentive to one of the major innovations in education, distance learning. As I mentioned earlier, these unnecessary federal regulations mean increased regulatory burdens for institutions and, in turn, greater compliance costs trickle down to increased expense for students and their families. The federal government's involvement in elementary and secondary education illustrates what happens when Washington gets too big. The most recent reauthorization of ESEA, the No Child Left Behind Act, is a perfect example of good intentions at the federal level adrift in a feckless sea of red tape and over-regulation. This law is a classic example of federal top-down attempts to improve education in America's schools, a noble goal, but it has completely failed. If we can agree on anything, it's that our children should be well educated and prepared for a life of productive citizenship. However, the federal government's ability to accomplish this is in serious doubt. As history has shown time and again, federal meddling has resulted in a one-size-fits-all approach that neglects local concerns and produces a grotesque layer of regulation and wasteful bureaucracy. Right now, my colleagues in the House Education and Workforce Committee are working on the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. And while my colleagues across the aisle won't support all our revisions, we did find consensus on charter school legislation last year. H.R. 2218 received bipartisan support in committee and passed the House by a bipartisan vote of 365 to 54 in September. Although we may not always agree, I hope we can continue to find ways to work with our colleagues across the aisle to improve education in this country. Thomas Jefferson once said, "Were we directed from Washington when to sow and when to reap, we should soon want bread." Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote for the rule and the underlying bill, which would repeal a small part of the burdensome and unnecessary federal regulations that we're struggling with, and take one step toward reducing federal intrusion in higher education. I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered, and the question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Just one vote here on the House floor. It is a vote on the rule for a bill that would repeal a couple of recent Education Department regulations passed last year by the Education Department. One would repeal provisions of the department's rules on eligibility of higher education institutions to participate in federal student aid programs. The other would repeal the minimum standards for state authorization of for-profit schools within the state. This is the rule for debate on that bill. If passed, the rule would allow for an hour of general debate and consideration of 5 amendments. On the legislation, the publication Inside Higher Education said the bill has led to some strange bedfellows. For-profit colleges, non-profit and public colleges, and Republican lawmakers all support it. They also write the Obama administration argues that the regulations are needed to protect students and the federal financial aid programs. They say that in a statement last Thursday, the White House said it, quote, strongly opposed the bill, but it did not threaten a presidential veto should it attract enough votes in the House and Senate to become law. That from Inside Higher Ed Today. So 15-minute vote here on the rule. If it passes, an hour of general debate and later consideration of 5 amendments. Also today on the House floor, they'll take up a bill that deals with private property rights and eminent domain. First recorded vote of the day in the U.S. House. This is a vote on the rule for a bill that's coming up shortly, a bill that would repeal two education rules. The publication Inside Higher Ed defines it as repealing to the federal definition of a federal credit hour to end the requirement that colleges obtain authorization from every state where they enroll students in online classes. They also say that although the program integrity rules were designed to rein in for-profit colleges, the credit hour definition and the state authorization requirement apply across sectors. Many public and private nonprofit colleges have opposed the two regulations in the bill's cites, saying the state authorization requirement is overly burdensome and expensive. That from Inside Higher Ed. Again, the rule vote, 15 minutes. If it passes, there will be an hour of general debate, and they will take up 5 amendments to the bill. A rule vote winding down on the House floor. This has been a 15-minute vote on a rule for a bill which would repeal several provisions of the Education Department's recent rules regarding eligibility of higher education institutions to participate in federal student aid programs. Specifically, it would repeal the minimum standards for state authorization of for-profit schools within the state. It also repeals the rule's definition of the term credit hour and would prohibit the Department of Education from drafting or implementing any new regulation that defines that term. The rule, if it passes, and it looks like it will, would allow for an hour of general debate and the consideration of 5 amendments. That'll be the first piece of legislation the House takes up today. Also later today, a bill that deals with the issue of eminent domain and private property rights.
Have all members voted?
On this vote, the yeas are 244, the nays are 171. The resolution is agreed to. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.